Hi, I'm Jason Aaron.
And we're Screen on the Spot.
And we're getting to know me through movies.
Hooray.
Awesome. Man.
I'm so excited for this interview.
Yeah?
Yes.
Yes.
Good.
You have a very interesting and cool background, which I had to read about because I'm not a comic book person, but I am into Marvel movies. So
cool. Yeah. I guess I undersold you when I told them that I was bringing you on, but maybe that's a good thing.
Oh, sure. You were really pumped for this one.
I was pretty excited that you were agreed to come on. I'm friends with the guy who runs Elite Comics, and so he had shared that you were going to go there to do a signing. And so I was like, oh, that's a pretty good time. I should reach out to Jason Aaron and see if he wants to come on the podcast. And I'm glad it worked out. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, shout out to William at Elite Comics in Overland Park.
That's
thanks
right.
for hooking us up with an awesome guest.
Yeah, they're really. I like that. That's my go-to comic shop because I live in Overland Park. So
yeah, me too. That's my local shop.
Perfect. So it's cool and exciting because you write comic books and stuff, and not just comic books, but you've written for Marvel and you've written all kinds of stuff. But you live in Overland Park, is that correct?
Prairie Village.
Prairie Village.
Yeah. I grew up in the South. I grew up in Alabama.
Okay.
But I mean, I've lived here for now 22 years. Is that right? I moved the day after the first X-Men movie came out. The first, Bryan Singer. X-Men movie.
Yeah.
Saw that on Friday. Drove here on Saturday.
What was the draw to Kansas City?
I had family here. My sister had moved here, so I'd graduated college in Alabama, and just kind of wanted to go somewhere else. That's where I'd always been. Didn't really know where I'd wind up. Didn't know that I would be here. That I would stay here. So kind of moved here out of the blue. Loved it. My comic career developed while I was here. I got to meet a lot of, we have a really great comic community here in Kansas City. So, yeah, and I'm still here.
Was that something you knew when you were coming to Kansas City? Were you already into writing?
No, I had no idea. I mean, I was definitely already into comics. I've been reading comics since I was a kid, and said, pretty early as a kid that I wanted to do that for a living someday. Had no idea how you went about doing that. So I went to college, loved to write the whole time. So I was always writing, crappy novels and doing movie reviews and that sort of thing, anything I could write. And just kind of took until it was 2001 when I won a Marvel Comics talent search contest. So after I had moved here, I drove to a convention in Chicago, and there was this kind of weird contest Marvel did with they had never really done before, and they haven't done it since. So it was this kind of odd one-time thing that I drove up to Chicago and entered and ended up winning, and that was my first published comic gig.
And then the rest, it's just how it just went from there essentially.
Yeah, well, I mean, it took another 5 years before I had something else in print. So it was like probably the 5 years I've worked the hardest of all the years I've been, working in comics, just pitching things, writing things, and then my kind of first full gig was a Vietnam War comic at Vertigo, which was, like the mature readers imprint of DC. Mm-hmm. And that kind of led to the next thing. And then from that, it was just sort of one thing leading to another. But
do you feel like you've helped grow the comic book community here in Kansas City a great deal?
I mean, I don't know that I can take credit for that, but I think there was already a really good community when I moved here. There's certainly more people who've, some of it's the Art Institute, I think has always attracted a lot of people. So there's a lot of people around that. But for whatever reason, it's just like it's a cool confluence of folks who work in all different parts of comics, big companies, small companies, artists, writers, a little bit of everything here.
Did you know at a young age that this is what you wanted to do, or when did that spark happen?
Yeah, I mean, I learned how to read from comics, so I've kind of always been reading comics. I can look back. I've still got the first books I ever bought off the spinner rack. They're sitting on a spinner rack in my basement. So I think it's pretty quickly like I realized I want to do this. Somebody writes these stories. I also loved to draw when I was little too, so maybe I wanted to draw them, but I'm terrible at drawing these days. I'm terrible at Pictionary or whatever. So yeah, I said pretty early, like, I want to do that, but had no clue, how you did that. And me, I lived in a small town, in the deep South, so there was really nobody in my neck of the woods who wrote for a living, let alone wrote comics. we'll talk, we'll get to like the one person when we talk about the movies, the one person I knew who did write. So it just took me, until I was almost 30 before I was able to figure out how do you get a foot in the door of this industry.
That's awesome.
What are some of your favorites, like growing up? Favorite
comics that I read? I started out as a big DC kid, so a lot of Batman. There were sort of odd, mostly forgotten DC books in the early mid-'80s, like Atari Force and Blue Devil. Those are books I latched onto. I think because they started like at the time I was, going to the spinner rack, you see like, oh, that's the number one.
Brand
like,
new, yeah.
Right, so grab that. But it was a great time to get into comics, like I was kind of right before DC's big Crisis on Infinite Earths event, which was really great. Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns came out not long after that. Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. New Teen Titans was a huge book that I was into. That's very much the stuff that pulled me in. Then I eventually found Marvel and found the X-Men, and that's pretty most of my career I've been working at Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
But I definitely started as a DC kid.
Yeah. Is there any character that you've written for that when you got the opportunity to do it and were actually getting paid to do it, that just kind of felt like, holy crap, this is unreal?
Oh, I mean, I'd say that about every character I've written, I mean, I think it's definitely a big thing the first time you put words in the mouth of Spider-Man. I think the first time I did that was I was writing Ghost Rider. That was my first like ongoing gig at Marvel. And it was one page where I was going to have a cutaways to a bunch of different characters reacting to, this event that was going on. And one of them was Spider-Man. So it was just in one panel, said probably, 2 balloons of dialogue. But I think I worked all day on just those two lines of dialogue because it was Spider-Man, right?
Yeah.
And I thought,
It's amazing.
I think whenever you first get that gig, there's always that feeling of like, man, I don't know how I snuck into this party. I'm definitely not supposed to be here. At some point, somebody's going to tap me on the shoulder and say, you got to go. So it's like, I want to try to write as many characters as I can before they throw me out. So I think everybody has that impulse. Spider-Man was definitely one I went for. And yeah, it feels, it still feels like that anytime I get to write Spider-Man. But, I could say that about so many of the characters I've gotten to work on.
Sure.
I have one last question before we move on to the movie portion. Justin was telling me that you worked for Marvel. So in my brain, like there's a Marvel headquarters in New York or something like that, and you have to be there to write. But you can do that from anywhere. Like you've been working for them for how many years now? And you've been doing it all here in Kansas City, right? So you don't have to be wherever they're based out of.
Yeah, that's one of the great things about this job these days is I work with people who literally live all over the world. Like I'll work on books where you've got 3 or 4 different countries represented just on the people working in that book. Yeah, Marvel is still based in New York. There's still a Marvel headquarters there. I haven't been in a few years, since COVID. Those people are all still working remotely at this point, but back in the old days, we would go there. I'd go there 2-3 times a year, and we'd have big meetings in the offices, which was always cool. But yeah, every time I travel, I get to travel and do comic conventions all over the world, and it literally every time I go to a country I've never been to, I'll meet 3 or 4 different artists who I've worked with over the years, just never met face to face before.
That's really cool. I mean, they had the remote work thing down before everyone figured it out in the last couple of years.
Yeah, that part was not a big change for me the last few years. Yeah, with freelancers, we've all been doing that for a while.
Sure. Well, as far as a Kansas City connection goes, especially something that's very cool is that you actually wrote the Thor comics that inspired the most recent Thor movie in the MCU. So I wanted to ask, was it your idea specifically to have Jane Foster take over the Thor mantle, or was that something that sort of was happening and then but then you got a chance to write it?
No, that was my idea. That was, I'd been writing Thor for I think a couple years at that point. I think that was like 2 years into my run, and had always wanted to do it. I made the idea of worthiness kind of a big part of my run from the beginning. Sort of the idea of Thor is a god who always questions his worthiness, and he's got this hammer that tells him in some sense whether he's worthy or not. I really like that idea as one of his main motivating factors, that every day he wakes up and looks at that hammer and he knows he picked it up yesterday, but he doesn't know if he's going to be able to today. And that's really one of the things that drives him and makes him the hero that he is. So given all that, I knew I was going to get to a point where one day he's going to wake up and he can't pick it up, you know, for whatever reason. He's unworthy, and that sets him off on a particular journey, and then that opens the door for somebody else to come in and pick it up and wield it for a while. And I knew right away that I wanted that to be Jane. I'd kind of already, you know, she goes back to sort of I think the second appearance of Thor was Jane's first appearance. She was kind of always a part of the book. She was always a supporting character. She was the love interest. She was the nurse to Thor's alter egos, you know, Dr. Donald Blake. So she kind of had always been around, but she'd never been like the center of that corner of the Marvel universe. And I had established in an issue where she popped up already in my run that she was dealing with breast cancer, and that was a thing she didn't want Thor's help with. He's like, let's go find some magic to fix that. She's like, no, that stuff always comes with a price. I'm going to, you know, do this my own way. So we'd seeded that. So I kind of knew right away, like, okay, if she's going to pick up the hammer, like it all kind of fell into place to be what I think is the most traditionally sort of Marvel story I've ever told. And that, you know, the Marvel stuff, the hook of it was always like Spider-Man, he can do all these amazing things, but everybody hates him and he struggles to pay his rent. You know, like there's always this sort of human struggle.
Of being,
right, exactly.
A superhero, yeah.
So with Jane, you know, she's dealing with breast cancer. She's going through cancer treatments. She's got to pick up the hammer to go be Thor, go save the day. Every time she does that, it sort of neutralizes the effects of the chemo that she just took. You know, it kind of purges that from her body. So when she comes back to being Jane, she's sicker than she was before. So she's kind of killing herself the more she does this. Well, at the same time, flying around, loving getting to be Thor, loving being the center of, you know, the Thor corner of the Marvel universe, loving getting to hit, you know, Odin in the face with a hammer, like all that kind of stuff. So it definitely felt like an old kind of throwback Marvel story with a lot of emotional weight to it. And yeah, that story went on for, you know, like another 4 years or so of my run.
Did you have any idea that that's where the movies were going to go, or did you just kind of find out when they announced it at Comic-Con like everybody else?
I think, yeah, I found out about the Jane part of it, I think, when they announced it. I mean, I'd kind of, you know, I'll hear rumblings, I'll hear things get passed down to me that, hey, maybe they're going to deal with some of your stuff, but didn't know it for sure until, you know, Natalie Portman walked out on stage and picked up the hammer.
Is that common for Marvel to come in and to say, ooh, I want to take this part of this? Or is that just something that just happened?
I mean, yeah, I think these days, you know, Marvel's producing so much content, Marvel Studios, in terms of, you know, multiple movies a year, all the different shows they have on Disney Plus. You can look at those and see they're pulling from a lot of different. It's not like they just take this one book and adapt it. Any one of those shows pulling from a dozen different comics by a lot of different creators. So at this point, I'll be surprised of like, oh, I did that.
Yeah.
That'll pop up, and like there was a little Doctor Strange bit from my run that popped up in the Spider-Man movie. So it's, you know, they're pulling so much stuff from so many, even books that are brand new that kind of just came out. You'll see stuff pop up from those in the shows or the movies.
Was it pretty exciting then to see the story on screen, especially probably as a fan as well?
Frustrating because you're like,
or maybe frustrating, but I
okay.
guess what was the feelings when you got, because I know you got to go to the premiere too, is that right?
Yeah, I got to go to the premiere. I got to be a little involved, you know, in the process and kind of talk story with Taika Waititi and see some of the early cuts and sort of give thoughts. So it was cool to be a part of the process in sort of a bigger way than I ever had been before. Yeah, the whole thing is cool and weird and surreal and to see, you know, characters I created, like the villain in the movie is also from a different part of my run. To see, you know, that they're action figures and Happy Meals toys, and going into LA to the premiere, and there's giant, you know, posters of the characters throughout the city, all that stuff. Very, 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 very weird and you know, cool. I mean, it's still like that. It's sort of different from what I do, right? Like I still come home and I sit in a room by myself and I write comic books, and that's what I want to keep doing. All this other stuff is just sort of gravy. That I certainly have fully enjoyed, being able to go buy those Happy Meal toys and all that sort of stuff, and see little girls dressed up like Jane Foster at Halloween. But at the end of the day, like, regardless of how things get adapted, like the books I wrote, they're still there. They still exist. Hopefully people will see that film, want to know more, go pick those up and check them out.
That's a really cool way to look at it. Well, then before we start asking our movie questions, I'd like to ask about your new comic, Once Upon a Time at the End of the World.
Yeah, it's a new original series I'm doing with Boom Studios. It's probably the biggest, most ambitious creator-owned book I've ever done, and that it's set in the post-apocalyptic wasteland. It opens with these two young characters, boy and a girl, who meet each other, in the ruins of the old world. Something sparks there. They set off on this adventure together with sort of dark forces chasing after them. That's the first 5 issues of this book. When we get to the second arc, we pick up with those characters when they're grown up, they're adults, they're trying to settle down and sort of rebuild civilization. Jump ahead to the third arc, they're old at the end of their life, as the planet itself is also kind of breathing its last. So we follow these two characters and their relationship through 3 different periods of their lives. Each of those arcs is drawn by a completely different art team.
Oh, that's cool.
And then those chapters will also interweave at times, and we'll cut back and forth. So it's really, the story. It's like a love story in a time of ruin, but not just the part of the love story that's people meet and fall in love, which is what we usually get, but kind of where do things go from there, and all the sort of joys and struggles, that come with that.
That's awesome.
I think I've decided you have the best job in the world.
Yeah, thanks.
You don't have to deal with people on a daily basis.
You get to work from home.
You get to be in the room by yourself, work from home.
You get to travel,
do what you love and write.
Yeah.
And then you get to travel the world and sometimes see your characters make a huge splash on screen. That's neat.
Thanks. I agree. Like, I feel that way. Literally every day I get up and, go upstairs, and I don't have to put regular pants on. I'm sitting there in my pajamas, my beard uncombed, just making up stories.
That's so fun.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's get to know you a little bit better through movies, if that's okay.
Cool. Yes, absolutely.
What is a movie you saw way too young?
Oh, I mean, probably lots of movies. My mom was super supportive, and kind of any weird thing I'd pick up at the video store, she would rent for me. So definitely, like, I saw Road Warrior, I think was the first movie I ever rented and watched. I remember going, it wasn't even a video store yet. It was like a back corner in a appliance rental store, in town that had movies. And every day I'd go there, and Road Warrior was always rented out. So eventually I saw it and loved it. But that opened the door for me to wanting to see all the other crappy, post-apocalyptic movies of the time, which none of them were Road Warrior. Most all of them were, way more adult than I probably should have been watching at the time. So definitely a bunch of those.
Yeah.
What is the first movie you remember seeing in theater?
I think E.T. E.T. was that 82?
I think so.
And did he scare you? Because I always saw him way too young, and I was terrified of E.T.
Oh, yeah?
when I was a kid.
No, I don't think he. I just fell in love with him.
What a cool little alien dude.
I remember the line to get into the theater was incredibly long, going down the block. And I remember my mom crying at the end. I was kind of looking up I think I've seen my mom cry before, but she's crying when E.T.'s got to go home. So yeah, I think that, and I mean, Empire Strikes Back are the two I vividly remember the theater experience for both of those.
That's really cool. I get excited when people mention these movies that are considered classics now, because I was a little too young for it. And I feel like besides something like maybe Endgame being a huge deal, I feel like we don't get a lot of those that I wonder if in 20 years we're going to be like, man, it's really cool. I got to see that movie in a theater,
That,
Yeah, you're right. I don't know. And now, movies are so readily available. You watch them on your phone. But back then it was like an event. Everybody was going to see E.T., the whole world. So,
is there a moment that you remember that's your most memorable experience?
I would say probably when Pulp Fiction came out.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was loved Reservoir Dogs.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to see Pulp Fiction opening day in the morning with my mom again. And there were dudes there like in their Reservoir Dog suits. Like it was perfect audience for that movie. Not a huge crowd. You know, this is back in Alabama. Great crowd to see it with. Then I went to see it again later that day with my friends. Like, so I saw it twice opening day. There were definitely, like, as I was going in the second time, there were people coming out looking at me like, weren't you just here? And I saw that movie probably more in the theater than I've ever seen any other movie.
I think it's awesome that your mom would take you to, it seems like so many movies.
She seems very supportive.
Yeah.
Of movies.
She did, yeah. You know, and she bought me all the comics I wanted to read. I remember told this story before, but like I read Watchmen, Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' Watchmen when that came out, and it's like blowing my mind. But I only had like one comic book reading friend in my small school, and he was more a Morrow guy. He hadn't read Watchmen, so I didn't have anybody to talk to about it. So my mom read Watchmen, you know, so she and I could talk about it.
Yeah.
What did you think of the TV series? Did you watch that at all?
I did. Yeah, I thought it was really good. It was really,
really well
yeah.
done.
I liked it a lot. You know, hats off to Damon Lindelof for what he did with that show. It was really impressive.
Yep, for sure.
Is there, or what movie or movies do you find yourself quoting the most?
I don't know if anybody even knows what this movie is, but Walter Hill directed this movie back in the 80s called Crossroads with Ralph Macchio.
Yeah.
Where he's like this kid who wants to play the blues, and he goes on this journey, and at the end there's this incredible finale where he has to do a guitar battle against the devil's guitarist for his own soul and the soul of his friend. Love that movie. It's one. I saw that in the theater when it came out. I've kind of always loved it. Most people don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Was that post Karate Kid or pre Karate
yes,
Kid?
I think it was right after the first Karate. So it's like he was at his hottest. But the movie, you know, nobody saw it.
I thought you were going to say the Britney Spears Crossroads.
That's what I was thinking. I'm glad somebody else thought about that.
That's what everybody says when I mention that movie. But I quote that movie a lot. I mean, and usually just the last 30 minutes. Like my son, who's 17 now, he had seen the ending of that movie so many times because literally every 4 or 5 months, I'm like, I need to watch the end of Crossroads. And eventually he's like, can we watch the whole movie? Like which the rest of the movie's good, but it literally hits that point when it becomes a different movie, and it's like, what is happening?
I'm going to have to add that to my list.
Yeah, I was going to say,
I wonder if it's on a streaming site.
Mm-hmm.
Do you watch it on Netflix or anything?
I don't know. That's a good question. I own it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I know of it.
I'll let you guys borrow it.
Okay, there we go.
I quote the ending of that movie a lot. Like I don't remember the actor who plays the devil in that.
Mm-hmm.
Probably my favorite movie version of the devil. So
that's awesome.
My son hears me quote that a lot.
That's great. What is your favorite movie with some sort of tie to Kansas City?
Well, Don Cheadle's from Kansas City, right?
Mm-hmm.
He plays a great role in one of my 3 movies that we'll get to, Boogie Nights. So yeah, I think him. I mean, I love Robert Altman's Kansas City, which I've only seen a few times, but I'm definitely a big Robert Altman fan.
Yeah, Nashville is probably my favorite. Although I love The Long Goodbye. Kind of feel like it's like the underrated Altman movie. But.
Sure.
What is a movie that you wish more people would see?
Crossroads.
Okay,
that was good. That's a good
Crossroads.
It sounds like it.
Then they would get your movie references.
Yeah.
You're
Right.
quoting it all the time.
I usually just quote that at home. You know,
Yeah.
it's sort of like I quote movies and I dance just for my son or my girlfriend. Like that's it. I keep it within a tight circle.
Well, at least these 3 people will be extra. The people who have seen have seen Crossroads.
Cool. Well,
I'm really excited to watch this.
I don't even know what.
I'm really excited.
Yeah.
Like I've shown the ending of it to a lot of people, but I don't know what people really make of the movie overall. So I'll be excited. We'll do a follow-up episode where you talk about that. So.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you have a favorite superhero movie or comic graphic novel adaptation?
Yeah. I mean, I think a superhero movie, I would probably say Captain America Winter Soldier.
I love Winter
I
Soldier.
think that one's really hard to beat. I mean, of course, like, you know, Superman still holds a really special place in my heart. Those first 2 Tim Burton Batman movies, because those were loved those so much when they came out. But yeah, probably for just saying best overall, probably Winter Soldier. But I mean, comic book overall, I really love Road to Perdition.
Oh yeah.
You know, which
That's one I forget is even based on a comic.
I was about to say I had no idea that was based on a comic.
Yeah, I can't remember who published that book originally. Like, it was not very widely read, but that's a really, really good movie.
Yeah, it is.
What's a movie people give you the most grief for not seeing?
Oh yeah, I mean, everybody's always got holes. I don't know. I mean, I had never seen Goonies until like 2 years ago.
Oh really?
Wow. Which was I don't know why. I mean, I was the perfect day. It's one of those that just kind of slipped between the cracks.
But did you like it when you watched it?
I did, but you know, seeing it when you're
an adult,
right? You're in your 40s is not quite the same as seeing it. It's one of those like, oh really? Like, I waited this long to see it. I don't know what the fuss was about. Another one was Mary Poppins. I'd never seen Mary Poppins, and my girlfriend rectified that. She was horrified. So that's two that I have recently seen. I'm sure there's others that I haven't that I'm not thinking of.
Any Marvel movies you haven't seen?
No, I've definitely seen all those. I just saw Black Panther recently. I mean, that became a thing. Like, my son and I would go see all those in the theater.
Do you keep up with all the TV shows too? Now that they're all coming.
No, I'm definitely a little behind on that. Yeah. It's hard.
It's hard. There's a lot.
I feel
now.
like that would be really hard to keep up with.
I was really down on She-Hulk for a long time. I'm like, I have no desire to watch She-Hulk, and then I watched it, and I was like, oh, this was really cute and fun. So
good.
I'm trying to keep up on all of those too. There's a lot.
There is, and then Star Wars shows.
And all the Star Wars shows are coming out. Right?
I know it makes the rewatching really difficult because, like, sometimes, usually, when like a new Marvel movie's coming up, I try to either rewatch all of them or at least as much as I can leading up. But now it's a feat. It's really hard to do that now. What is a movie that you always defend, no matter how bad people say it is?
Crossroads.
Is it?
I mean, I would if somebody was who's saying that it's bad. I mean, I definitely have had some of those experiences, which I'd love, of being in a theater and watching a movie that I am totally enjoying, and you realize everybody else in this theater hates this movie. So one of those for me was Eyes Wide Shut. Like, I saw that. I'm a big Kubrick fan. I saw that opening night, and there was so much speculation about that movie and excitement about it, and Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman were a big thing, and Kubrick had just died, and so I think you had a bunch of people in that theater who'd never seen a Kubrick movie before.
They didn't know what they were in for.
And they were like, what is this? And I loved it. That's still one of my favorite movies. I think it's kind of inched its way onto my Christmas movie list.
Oh, yeah. That's so funny. We have a friend who he watches it for Christmas. Yeah, that's so funny.
Oh, good.
What's your favorite movie soundtrack?
Oh, that's a tough question. I mean, I like a lot of Philip Glass soundtracks, scores. Like, I can't listen to music or anything when I'm working.
Yeah.
But, there have been times I'll listen to, like, orchestral scores. So I think the soundtrack for Mishima
I don't know that.
is really, really, it's one of the best, I think, scores ever written. Strange movie, too. Good movie. It's Paul Schrader, right?
Oh,
okay.
Paul Schrader. I recommend it. Like, it's commitment, and there's a lot going on. Really gorgeous movie to look at too, and the score is incredibly powerful. Kind of pulls it all together.
It's a lot of Paul Schrader movies, probably. Sometimes they're hard. Like, I love First Reformed, but it's sort of a hard. Sometimes it's kind of a hard movie to recommend people sit down to watch.
For sure,
but you have to be careful, like who you're recommending it to.
Right.
Mostly,
sure.
Like my parents are not going to like First Reformed,
that was
so
a really
I know.
hard one to watch.
Is there a movie that you were so excited to see, and it was a complete letdown for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that has happened many times. Unfortunately, I think. Especially these days, I feel the movies I tend to enjoy are the ones I kind of don't have expectations for, don't really know what is this going to be. I think one of the most recent ones that I was really excited for, because they, these days they're wizards in terms of taking a not great movie and making an incredible looking trailer for it. So the first of the recent new American Godzilla movies, I forget what the first one was called. Was it just Godzilla?
I think
King of Monsters?
Yeah, well, there was Godzilla, and then there was King of Monsters, and then
that first one, that trailer for that looked incredible. Like, oh, this is going to be terrific. This is exactly what you need to do. Movie, not so much, and I've watched all of those. I haven't really loved, and I really enjoy Godzilla movies. I thought Shin Godzilla, the most recent Japanese one from a few years ago, was terrific. I loved it. But the American one's not so much.
Yeah.
Was that the one that was like in 2014
maybe with Bryan Cranston?
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought,
Yeah.
Then they had a second one, and
I
they
was
did
thinking like
Godzilla
the other
versus
one from like
Kong.
2000,
Yeah.
and then I forgot about that
I
one with Bryan
actually
Cranston.
didn't hate-
Yeah.
I didn't see the second one. I saw the first one and then the versus Kong one. I didn't think they were that bad. They were okay.
Yeah, and they've struggled to kind of make me care about any of the actual people.
Yeah,
in
exactly.
Those
Yeah.
movies. So
Yeah.
kind of either give me people to care about or just give me monsters.
Yeah.
to fight each other. I thought the first Kong, the Skull Island, was pretty good.
Yeah, I like
enjoyed
that
it.
one.
Even though there's like 30 too many characters.
Yeah.
in that movie.
Yeah, there were a lot. Well, I mean, you needed more people to kill off than.
Yeah.
Yeah.
than
Did
not.
they kill them
Only
all
so
off,
many
for
could
sure.
fit on the boat.
Yeah.
It's a big ass boat.
What was the last movie or TV series that you watched?
Well, I'll give you both. Like the last movie I saw was Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, which I enjoyed. Like I think they did a great job paying tribute to Chadwick Boseman in that, and kind of bringing in Namor and the undersea stuff. I thought that movie was really fun. I'm a big Ryan Coogler fan. And then the last TV show I watched was Interview with the Vampire, which I'd seen those trailers and thought, I'm not really interested in that. I mean, I loved those books back in the day, but I'd heard people raving about it, so I watched the first episode, and I think burned through the whole season in like a week, which I pretty much never do.
Sure.
I'm like
Yeah.
anti-binging. I'm always like, no, we need to stop and savor this,
Yeah.
before we move on to that one. I was like, oh, well, like I want to keep going.
Yeah.
So it's I was really impressed with that. I highly recommend it.
So you gave me 3 movies that are considered, I guess, favorites or important. And your first one was Full Metal Jacket.
Yeah, and that one, that I have a personal connection to, and that, like I talked about, I grew up in kind of the backwoods of Alabama. There weren't people around who wrote for a living. The one guy who was my cousin, Gus Hasford, who he was from the same neck of the woods as I was. He was a Vietnam vet. He was a combat correspondent during Vietnam. So from that, he wrote a book called The Short Timers, which is what Full Metal Jacket was based on.
Oh, that's really cool.
And then he, worked got a credit on the screenplay with Stanley Kubrick and Michael Herr. Gus was, a lot older than me. He was my mom's nephew, but he was older than she was. So I only met him in person, I think 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely one of those times I remember he and I sitting in the back of my dad's truck reading comics together. But Gus was a bigger than life character, kind of, he dropped out of high school, very self-educated guy, read voraciously, could talk at length about kind of any subject. Read so voraciously that he spent time in jail for stealing hundreds of library books from libraries around the country.
For stealing library books?
Yeah, he liked to say they were just overdue, but
you should. You shouldn't get somebody in trouble for that. You should be like, "Oh, good for you!
Yeah,
way to be
reading.
a voracious reader."
He's not wrong. They just are overdue.
Yeah.
I think when you have 700 or so of them, they look at it differently.
Yeah.
So yeah, and he died in the 90s, so kind of before I was old enough to talk to him seriously about, hey, I want to write too. But yeah, he was a huge influence on me. After he died, I kind of spent a lot of time researching his life and putting his writings together, created a website. Through that, I got to meet his group of Marine combat correspondents from like 1968 and hung out with those guys, went to their reunions. So from all that, I had the idea to write a Vietnam War comic, was my first real book that I did back in 2006. It's called The Other Side. That was my first full published comic series, so it was very much dedicated to Gus and to those other combat correspondents. So that, kind of all goes back to Full Metal Jacket was very much the thing that put him on the map. I mean, Kubrick as a director was, Stephen King hates The Shining, right? Like he was the guy who'd take, when he adapted something, he adapted it. He was going to make it his own. So the first, like the boot camp stuff from Full Metal Jacket is pretty much straight out of Gus's book. The Vietnam stuff, divulges in some big places. So it's not a perfect adaptation of The Short Timers, but I still think it's one of the best war movies ever made.
Agreed. What's another movie you gave it?
Boogie Nights.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a huge Paul Thomas Anderson fan. I probably do prefer like his earlier stuff when he's
Sure.
had a little more of a
That's
sense of narrative.
Yeah, that's how I feel.
But Boogie Nights in particular, like I kind of love I love any movies that have like an epic scope, and that one does. You know, you get the rise and fall of all these characters. There's a lot of crazy characters, a lot of wild stuff that happens in that movie, but I love that at the end of the day, it's really just a movie about family, right? Like about this weird found family, not just the people, who are your family by blood. We see kind of a lot of characters in that movie have issues with those people, especially Mark Wahlberg's characters who, doesn't get along with his parents at all. But then he finds his way into this collection of complete oddballs who very much become this beautiful little family, and that family gets challenged and broken apart. But then when you see them come back together at the end, I think is really powerful. Like there's so many scenes in that movie that I think are just so intense and chilling and beautiful. Credible performances. Like the cast of that movie is really
it's insane,
amazing. I think there are times you can just watch Philip Seymour Hoffman in the background of that movie when he doesn't even have a line. Like watch what he's doing. That's one of those movies that kind of never gets old.
It's funny when we were talking about movies that you go into the theater and you're just like, what did I just watch? The one that came to my mind was Magnolia. I'm sure you probably love that.
Yeah.
That, just like I talked about having the experience of watching Eyes Wide Shut in a full theater, people exact same experience.
That I watched Magnolia and I'm just like, what am I watching? What's going on? And I couldn't get through it.
And it's very long too.
It is. I mean, that was like the 2 VHS
when
it came out, and I was like, okay, you got to get up and put the other VHS in or the other.
Have you gone back to try it again?
I haven't, because I'm not the huge PTA fan.
Right.
So
we talk about this a lot.
Boogie Nights is one that I do like, though.
Yeah.
His early stuff for me is, well, I like Boogie Nights is just one of my favorite movies in general. But and I like his most recent stuff. It's kind of wild to think that you go from Boogie Nights to like The Master, or
his more recent stuff is always challenging.
Sure.
And some of it resonates with me, and some of it I'm still trying to figure out. But I appreciate directors who make things that are challenging.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because there's so much stuff that comes out that is very much the opposite, right?
That's right.
I have a lot to watch. I haven't seen Boogie Nights.
Oh, that's bananas.
Oh.
Haven't seen Full Metal Jacket.
Wow.
Now I have to see Crossroads. So there's
that should
like
be the top of your list, really. I mean, you could probably push Magnolia down to the bottom.
Well, I've heard so many people talk about Boogie Nights.
Yeah.
Maybe
Boogie Nights
don't.
You should watch.
I mean, maybe don't do Boogie Nights and Full Metal Jacket back to back. Maybe like that would be an intense evening.
That's a really rough night for you.
Right. Stick like Sleeping Beauty or something in the middle, like a palate cleanser.
Or Crossroads, because that sounds like a really fun,
exactly.
good way to break stuff up. So
Boogie Nights is also one I saw way too young, but it's so great.
I love that Burt Reynolds is I think great in that part, and he hated that movie.
Yeah,
right. Like he complained the whole time, seemed ashamed of it after it came out. Only once he got nominated for Best Supporting Actor did he seem to kind of acknowledge it. So I kind of that all makes me love his performance even more, knowing like he really hated what he was doing the whole time.
Well, speaking of kind of those iconic directors, your third movie falls also in that line of directors who make kind of interesting, cool things their own way. And what's your third movie?
Moonrise Kingdom.
Wild Left Turn.
Wes Anderson. Clearly I like directors with very distinctive styles.
Mentioned Quentin Tarantino, PTA.
If you'd asked me this question 20 years ago, it'd probably been 3 Oliver Stone movies. Like I was a huge Oliver Stone fan.
Are you a fan of JFK?
I love JFK.
Okay, we've been talking about this a lot this week because one of our coworkers just rewatched it, and Chris has never seen it.
Drew.
Well, Drew watches a lot, but Kyle specifically. Yeah. Chris has never seen it though.
Yeah.
And so
I'm the man who doesn't see things. Apparently,
we've been essentially bullying him into watching it, which is
So you haven't watched it yet? You still haven't watched it?
No, I've been like. I'm more of a horror movie guy, but then it's like a hard left turn around Christmas time where it's like Lifetime and Hallmark Christmas movie. It's my wife's fault. Let's be real.
That's what you say. But
I don't know what. I'd be interested to hear what you would make of JFK watching it for the first time now. I mean, it's like an assault on the senses. The style of that.
Absolutely.
Time. Like, did you see Natural Born Killers?
I've seen parts of it. some pretty gruesome parts.
Sure.
But no,
But just the manic visual style of that is, you know, JFK is very, very similar.
Sorry that we went really far off of Moonrise Kingdom, but I was curious. We were trying to read.
I brought up all of this time.
No, it's okay. What's something about Moonrise Kingdom, I guess, that makes it so important?
Well, I mean, I'm a huge Wes Anderson fan. I think from I think Tenenbaums was the first of his movies I'd seen when that first came out, and I was like, it's one of those things that either clicks for you or it doesn't, right? Like I think him in general, people either love or they're just like, you know, that guy's stuff doesn't work for me. Definitely clicked for me right from the beginning. Just I love his aesthetic. I love the world. I love the characters. Love the dialogue, soundtracks, everything. Such like a beautiful, perfect, pretty package for every one of his movies. If I had to pick one of any of his films that's my favorite, probably Moonrise Kingdom. I think that's the one where he nailed the weirdness of it, but there's just so much heart in that movie. And there's definitely some of that movie in the Once Upon a Time at the End of the World book that I'm working on.
Oh, okay.
When I first started thinking about the first arc of that series, I thought, well, this is like if Wes Anderson had directed Road Warrior, right? Yeah. Like that's what I'm going for.
That's really cool. That's a good sell.
We try to put some of that aesthetic and some of that kind of heart and quirkiness. I think you get that right away in the first issue.
Okay, that's awesome. And a good way to end it then, so people can go check that. That's in my opinion, a good sell, and not really a comparison that I would have ever expected for.
I would love to see Wes Anderson do like a post-apocalyptic movie with a love story. That sounds amazing.
It would have a terrific soundtrack.
I'll just read your book and hope somebody makes it into something.
Yeah. Jason, thanks so much for coming on and talking to us, and everybody should go check out Once Upon a Time at the End of the World.
Thank y'all. This was fun.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah.